I never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd put another human being through hell on purpose. I spent 22 years in the merchant marine, hauling container ships across the Pacific. And in all that time, I never raised my hand to anyone who didn't swing first. But when you walk into your own house and find what I found, something inside you breaks that doesn't grow back the same. Or maybe it grows back stronger. I still haven't figured out which. My name's Owen Driscoll. I'm 47 years old. I have one daughter, Hazel, who just turned 8 in March. She loves horses even though we live in a city, and she has this stuffed elephant named Mr. Pibbles that she's had since she was 3. The ear is half chewed off because she used to gnaw on it when she was teething. And my ex-wife Cassandra never could get her to give it up at night. Cassandra and I split 4 years ago. It wasn't ugly. We just stopped being two people who recognized each other. She got remarried last September to a guy named Trent Voss. He owns 3 CrossFit gyms in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, drives a black F-250 with chrome everything, and posts these motivational videos on Instagram where he yells at the camera about discipline and grind set. The first time I shook his hand at the courthouse parking lot when we did the custody handoff, he squeezed too hard, held the grip a beat too long, looked me dead in the eye while doing it. I told Cassandra I had a bad feeling about him. She said I was just being a jealous ex. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wanted her to be right. Hazel said Trent was okay, kind of strict but okay, and at 8 years old that should have been my red flag. But I'd just signed a new contract with Maersk, 8 weeks at sea on a route from Long Beach to Yokohama, and I told myself I'd keep a closer eye when I got back. That's the thought I lived with for the next 6 months. I'll keep a closer eye when I get back. It was supposed to be Cassandra's stretch with Hazel. Spring break, plus the 2 weeks after, since my contract didn't end until the 17th. But the ship blew a turbocharger somewhere west of Hawaii, and the company decided it was cheaper to fly the crew home and let the next rotation handle the limp-in. I landed at DFW on a Tuesday morning, the 8th of April, jet-lagged out of my mind, with a duffel bag and a stuffed sea otter I'd bought for Hazel at a gift shop in Yokohama on my last layover. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to surprise her. I figured I'd swing by Cassandra's place, scoop Hazel up for a Whataburger breakfast, and bring her back to my apartment in Plano for an early start to our 2 weeks. I had this whole thing planned. We were going to go to the state fairgrounds and ride the carousel. I booked us a cabin up at Lake Texoma for the weekend. Their house is in one of those master-planned communities up in Frisco. Stone facades, 3-car garages, HOA letters if your grass goes brown. I pulled into the driveway around 9:15. Cassandra's Lexus was gone, but Trent's truck was in the garage with the door open. I walked up to the front porch and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. I could hear a TV on inside. ESPN sounded like. The third time I knocked, I called out, "Trent, it's Owen. I'm here to get Hazel." I heard footsteps, then nothing, like he'd come to the door and stopped on the other side. "Trent, open up, man." The door cracked maybe 4 inches. He was in gym shorts and a tank top, sweating like he'd been on the treadmill. He didn't open the storm door. "You're not supposed to be here till the 17th, he said. "My contract got cut short. I'm here for Hazel. She's not home." "Where is she?" "Cassandra took her to her mom's in Tyler. They left yesterday." There was something about the way he said it. Too fast. Too rehearsed. And behind him, faint, I heard something. A sound that didn't belong in a quiet morning house. A scraping. A small, dull, repetitive thud. "I'll call Cassandra then," I said. And I pulled out my phone right there on the porch. His eyes moved. Just a flicker. Down and to the left. "The garage. Don't bother her," he said. "She's driving." I called anyway. It rang twice, and Cassandra picked up. She was in her kitchen. I could hear her coffee maker. She told me she was at home, that Trent had Hazel because she had an early meeting in Plano and was about to head into the office. Trent was supposed to be watching her. They were going to take her to the trampoline park later. I hung up. I looked at Trent through the screen door. "You want to try that again?" I said. He tried to close the door on me. I caught it with my boot. I'm not a big guy, but I've spent 2 decades hauling rope and crawling around the inside of containers, and I've got 50 pounds on a guy who skips leg day. I pushed the door open and he stumbled back into the foyer. "Where is she?" He didn't answer. I moved past him. I called her name. "Hazel. Hazel, it's Dad." Nothing. I went room to room. Kitchen. Living room. The TV was on, but the bowl of cereal on the coffee table was Trent's, not hers. I checked her bedroom upstairs. The bed was made too neatly. Nobody had slept in it. I came back down, and that's when I heard it again, that scraping. Coming from somewhere outside. I went out through the kitchen door into the backyard. Pool. Outdoor kitchen. Putting green. And at the far end of the yard, past a hedge, a pool house, one of those guest suite types with a kitchenette and a bathroom, the kind of thing realtors call a casita. The door had a deadbolt on it. But somebody had also run a chain through the handle and padlocked it. The scraping was coming from inside. I ran. I yelled her name. The scraping stopped. Then I heard her, and the sound she made is something I will hear in my head until I die. "Daddy?" It wasn't loud. It wasn't a yell. It was the voice of someone who'd stopped believing anyone was coming. "Hazel, baby. Hazel, it's me. I'm here. I'm right here. Daddy, is it really you? It's me, baby. It's me. I'm gonna get you out." I looked around for something. A landscaping rock. There was a wrought iron patio chair on the deck, and I grabbed one of the legs and bent it back and forth until the weld snapped. I took that iron bar to the padlock. It took 6 swings. On the 7th, the lock broke, and I yanked the chain free and threw the door open. The smell hit me first. I'd smelled it before, on the ship, when a refrigeration unit went down with 3 weeks of meat in it. That same thick, wrong smell. Sweat and urine and panic. The AC unit on the wall had been unplugged. April in North Texas. It had to be 90 degrees in there, maybe more. She was sitting on the floor against the back wall. She had on the same blue sundress she'd worn to Cassandra's mother's birthday 2 weeks before. She'd been picking at the drywall with a butter knife. That's what the scraping was. She was trying to dig her way out through a wall. There was a single empty water bottle next to her. Mr. Rivewall. Pibbles was on the tile next to her, and she'd wet herself. And she was so dehydrated, her lips had split in 3 places, and there was dried blood down her chin. She didn't get up. She just held out her arms, like she didn't have the strength to stand. I went to my knees, and I picked her up, and I held her so tight I was afraid I'd break her ribs. She didn't cry. She just whispered into my collarbone, over and over, "I knew you'd come. I knew you'd come." "How long, baby?" I said. "How long have you been in here?" "Since Saturday after lunch." It was Tuesday morning. I'm not going to tell you that I fought clearly in those moments because I didn't. I carried her into the main house. Trent was standing in the kitchen. He had his hands up. "It's not what it looks like," he said. She wouldn't listen. She kept asking when her mom was coming home. She wouldn't stop crying. I just needed her to chill out. I was going to let her out at lunch. I lost track of time. I sat Hazel on the kitchen counter and I got her a glass of water. She drank it so fast she gagged. I got her another one and made her sip it slow. The whole time I'm looking at Trent over her head and he's standing there in his tank top with his hands up like I'm the problem. "You locked an 8-year-old in a hot box for 3 days. It wasn't 3 days. It was, don't. I called 911. I told the dispatcher I had a child with severe dehydration and possible heat injury. I gave her the address. She told me an ambulance was coming. I told her I needed police too, and I told her why. While I was on the phone, Trent tried to walk out the front door. I told the dispatcher to hold on. I set the phone down. I caught him in the foyer. I didn't hit him. I want to be clear about that. I grabbed him by the collar of that tank top, and I walked him backwards into the living room, and I sat him down on his own leather couch, and I told him if he stood up before the police got there, I would break his jaw. He sat down. He started crying. Actual crying. He kept saying he was sorry. He kept saying it was a mistake. He kept saying Cassandra was going to leave him. Cassandra. I'd forgotten about Cassandra. The cops got there in 11 minutes. The ambulance was right behind them. Hazel went to Children's Health in Plano with a paramedic named Marisol, who let her hold her hand the whole way and told her she was the bravest patient she'd ever had. I rode in the back. I didn't let go of her until they wheeled her into a treatment room, and a nurse with kind eyes told me I had to wait outside for 10 minutes. I went out into the hallway and I called Cassandra. She picked up laughing about something somebody said in her meeting. I told her where I was. I told her what I'd found. There was a silence on the other end so long I thought we'd lost connection. Then she said, "Owen, are you sure?" I said, "Get to the hospital." The doctor came out about an hour later. His name was Dr. Bhargava. He was maybe my age, with kind, tired eyes. He took me into a little family room, and he sat me down, and he told me Hazel was stable. He told me she was severely dehydrated. He told me her kidneys had taken a hit. He told me her core temperature when they got her was 103. He told me another 12 hours and we might have been having a different conversation. Then he told me there were older bruises on her upper arms. Fingertip bruises. 2 weeks old, maybe 3. The shape of a man's grip. He told me he was a mandated reporter and CPS was already on their way. I sat in that room and I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just sat there. Cassandra showed up about 20 minutes after that. She came in still in her work clothes, mascara already running. She tried to hug me. I let her, because Hazel was watching from the bed through the open door. And I didn't want to make it worse for Hazel. But I didn't hug back. She kept saying she didn't know. She kept saying she had no idea. She kept saying she had no idea. She kept saying he told her Hazel was at a friend's house Saturday night. She kept saying she'd been so busy with the gym opening that she hadn't been home much. She kept saying she should have known. I asked her about the bruises. She started crying harder. She said Hazel had told her once that Trent grabbed her arm because she wouldn't sit still at dinner. She said Trent told her he barely touched her, and Hazel was exaggerating. She said she'd talked to him about it, and he promised it wouldn't happen again. I looked at her, the mother of my daughter. The woman I'd shared a bed with for 9 years, and I realized she'd known, maybe not the pool house, maybe not 3 days. But she'd known something was wrong, and she'd looked the other way because looking at it meant admitting she'd married a monster 8 months in. I didn't yell at her. I just stood up and I walked past her, and I went and sat next to Hazel's bed, and I held my daughter's hand, and I didn't speak to Cassandra for the rest of the day. Trent was arrested that afternoon. Booked into Collin County on charges of injury to a child and unlawful restraint. His bond was set at $75,000. His parents posted it the next morning. He was home in his own bed by Wednesday night with an ankle monitor and a no-contact order with Hazel. The district attorney told me they had a good case. She told me Texas takes child injury cases seriously. She told me the fact that he was a step-parent with no prior history was going to work in his favor at sentencing, but the medical evidence was strong. She told me the trial will be probably 9 to 12 months out. She told me Trent's lawyer was already floating language about a disciplinary measure that went too far. I drove home that night and I sat on my balcony and I looked out at the parking lot of my apartment complex and I thought about a man getting 9 to 12 months of his life on house arrest with a Peloton and a wife who was going to keep visiting him. My daughter was in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm because he put her in a hot box for 3 days. I didn't sleep that night. Or the night after. Or the night after that. Hazel came home with me on Friday. CPS had granted me temporary full custody, with Cassandra restricted to supervised visits while their investigation continued. Hazel didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want to talk about it much of anything. She'd ask me a question and then forget what she'd asked halfway through. She'd flinch when I closed a door. She slept in my bed because she wouldn't sleep alone. Mr. Pibbles slept between us. I got her a therapist. A woman named Dr. Imani Walters who specialized in pediatric trauma. Twice a week, an hour each time. Hazel started speaking again in week 2. Started smiling again in week 4. But she still wouldn't go outside if it was hot. She still wouldn't drink from a cup that wasn't see-through. She still hoarded snacks in her backpack and under her pillow. I started checking Trent's social media. He'd gone private, but his gym's pages were still public. His business was operating. His coaches were still posting workout videos. 3 weeks after he locked my daughter in a pool house, he was tagged in a story at a steakhouse in Southlake, eating a ribeye with 2 of his friends. Cassandra wasn't in the photo. I heard later from her sister that she'd moved into a corporate apartment, that she was trying to figure out how to divorce him without it looking like she was running. The lawyers had told her staying married through the criminal proceedings would look better in family court when she fought for visitation. I'm not proud of when I started planning. I'm not going to pretend it was some noble decision. I started planning because I was awake at 3 in the morning, and my daughter was crying in her sleep down the hall, and the man who put her there was eating a $40 steak. I had a buddy named Cyrus from my Maersk days. He'd gotten out of the Merchant Marine 2 years before me and started a logistics company outside Mesquite doing short-haul freight between Dallas and Houston. He had a yard, a real yard, with 3 or 4 shipping containers he used for overflow storage. I'd helped him move into it when he started up. I drove out there one Saturday afternoon. I told him I needed to borrow a container for a week. I told him I was helping a friend move some stuff out of a storage unit and didn't want to pay the rates. He didn't ask any questions, which is one of the things I love about him. He gave me the key to a 20-foot Conex unit in the back corner of his yard. He showed me where the cameras were and where they weren't. He didn't realize he was showing me. He just walked me around and complained about how the insurance company kept making him add coverage. I knew which container. I knew which corner. I knew the security guard came through at 1 and at 4 in the morning and didn't bother with the back fence. I spent 2 weeks figuring out Trent's schedule. The ankle monitor restricted him to home and to the gym, but his lawyers had gotten him an exception for ongoing business operations, and the gym was 23 minutes from his house. He drove himself. He left the gym most nights around 9:45 after the last boot camp class. He parked in the same spot every time, in the back corner of the lot, near a dumpster that the lights didn't quite reach. I want to tell you I argued with myself. I want to tell you there was a long, agonizing night where I waited. But that's not true. I made the decision the night Hazel woke up screaming because she'd dreamed the pool house door wouldn't open. I just didn't admit I'd made it for another 2 weeks. I borrowed Cyrus's old work van. I told him I was driving up to Oklahoma to help my brother move. I bought a stun gun at a sporting goods store in Sherman, paid cash. I bought a prepaid phone. I bought a roll of duct tape and a pack of zip ties from a Home Depot 2 cities over, paid cash, wore a ball cap. On a Thursday night, the first week of June, I parked behind that dumpster in the gym lot at 9:30. I had the van's windows tinted, but I parked nose out so I wouldn't have to back up. The lot was empty except for 2 cars, both employees. Trent came out at 9:48, gym bag over his shoulder on his phone. I stepped out of the van as he passed. I called his name. He looked up. His face went through 3 expressions in about half a second. Recognition, confusion, fear. "You're not supposed to be near me," he said. "That order's for Hazel." "Not me." He took a step back. He started to turn. I had the stun gun in my jacket pocket and I had it pressed against his ribs before he got 2 feet away. He went down. His phone hit the asphalt. I caught him under the arms and dragged him to the van and got him inside before either of those 2 other cars in the lot had reason to look our way. Zip ties on his wrists, zip ties on his ankles, duct tape over his mouth, a black t-shirt over his head. I picked up his phone and pulled the battery and tossed both into a storm drain on my way out of the parking lot. The whole way to Cyrus's yard, I drove the speed limit. I used my blinker. I came to complete stops at every stop sign. My hands were not shaking. That sure scared me. But it didn't. I pulled into the back corner of the yard at 10:46. The cameras didn't see me. The security guard was eating dinner in his shack on the other side of the property. I opened the container. I'd already been out earlier in the week and prepped it. There was a 5-gallon bucket in the back corner. There was a single bottle of water, half full. There was nothing else. The container was clean and empty and dark, and the temperature inside, in June, in Texas, was going to be exactly what I needed it to be. I dragged Trent inside. I cut the zip ties on his ankles. I left the ones on his wrists. I pulled the t-shirt off his head and ripped the duct tape off his mouth in one motion. He started talking immediately. "Owen, listen. Owen, we can talk about this. I have money. I have whatever you want. Whatever you want, man." I didn't answer. I just looked at him. He looked around the container. He saw the bucket. He saw the water. He started to understand. Owen, please. 72 hours, I said. Same as her. I'm going to come back every 12 and tell you what time it is. Owen, I'll die in here. It's going to be 110 in here tomorrow. It was 90 in the pool house when I found her. It's about the same as that. You'll live. Probably. Owen, please. Please, man. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Tell that to my daughter. I walked out. I pulled the door shut. I padlocked it. The sound of the latch dropping into the hasp was the same sound that Locke must have made when he closed it on Hazel. I drove home and I slept for 9 hours for the first time in 2 months. I went back 12 hours later. I parked the van in the same spot. I checked to make sure the yard was empty. I walked to the container and I rapped my knuckles on the door. Hour 12, I said through the small vent at the top. He started screaming. He started saying he'd already learned. He'd already understood. He was already sorry. He said he had asthma. He said he was going to die. He said his lawyer would find out. He said Cassandra would call the police. I told him at hour 12 Hazel had stopped crying. Not because she was okay, because she'd realized crying wasn't bringing anybody. She'd gone quiet. She'd started picking at the drywall. I closed the vent. Hour 24. He'd stopped yelling. He was rationing his breathing. He asked me, almost calm, if I was actually going to leave him there. I told him I was going to leave him exactly 72 hours. Hour 36, he cried. He told me about his own stepfather. He told me he'd been locked in a basement once for a whole day when he was 9. He told me he didn't know why he'd done it to her. He told me he thought he was disciplining her, the way he'd been disciplined. He told me he saw now that it was wrong. I told him in hour 36. Hazel had wet herself for the second time. She'd been trying to hold it. She was 8. She'd been raised right. She'd held it as long as she could. Hour 48. He begged. He said he'd plead guilty. He said he'd take whatever sentence. He said he'd sign anything. He said he'd never see Cassandra again. He said he'd never see Cassandra again. He said he'd leave Texas. He said he'd leave the country. I told him at hour 48 Hazel had stopped believing anyone was coming for her. I told him she'd started telling herself goodbye stories. I told him she'd told the therapist later that at some point in there she decided she was going to die in that room and she was trying to make peace with it. An 8-year-old. Making peace with dying. I closed the vent. Hour 60. He was quiet. I had to bang on the door to get him to respond. When I opened the vent, he said in a voice that didn't sound like the man I'd known, "I'm going to tell you what I did to Hazel the other times." I leaned closer to the vent. I didn't say anything. He told me he'd locked her in the pool house twice before for shorter stretches, 3 hours once, 6 hours another time. He said he'd grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises maybe a dozen times. He said he'd told her if she told her mother, he'd make sure her dog at her dad's house got hurt. We didn't have a dog. He'd made that threat up. She believed it. He told me he'd told her she was a brat. He told me he'd told her she was the reason her parents got divorced. He told me he'd told her that her father didn't love her because if her father loved her, he wouldn't keep leaving on ships. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there with my forehead against the cold metal of the container, and I listened to him say everything he'd done to my child, and I felt something inside me that I am not going to describe because there are no good words for it. I had recorded every conversation we'd had at the container, on the burner phone. I'd had it on me from hour 1, hour 72. I opened the door. The smell came out. He was sitting in the corner like Hazel had been sitting in the corner. His lips were cracked. His clothes were soiled. He didn't try to get up. He just looked at me with eyes that were not the same eyes I'd seen in that parking lot 3 days before. I cut the zip ties. I gave him a sip of water from a fresh bottle. I told him to walk out. He walked out, slow, blinking. I told him to sit down by the back fence. I told him here was what was going to happen. He was going to drive himself home. He was going to call his lawyer in the morning and tell him he was changing his plea to guilty. He was going to accept whatever sentence the state offered. He was going to tell his lawyer that he'd had a moral awakening. He was going to never contest custody. He was going to leave Cassandra alone. If he didn't do those things, the recording on my burner phone with his full confession about the other times was going to find its way to the district attorney, to the local news, and to every one of his Instagram followers. If he did do those things, the recording would never see the light of day, and we'd never see each other again. He nodded. He didn't speak. I don't think he had the strength. I drove him back to his truck. I left him in the gym parking lot at 3 in the morning with a fresh bottle of water and the bag of clothes I'd taken off him 3 days before. I drove the van back to Cyrus's yard. I cleaned the container. I returned the van the next afternoon and told Cyrus my brother sent his thanks. Trent changed his plea the following Monday. The district attorney was confused, but pleased. His lawyer was furious. The judge sentenced him to 11 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. With his clean prior record, he'd probably serve 6. He didn't fight it. He sat at the sentencing in a suit, expressionless, and when the judge asked if he had anything to say, he said, "I did what they said I did. I'm sorry. I won't appeal." I sat in the second row. He didn't look at me once. Cassandra filed for divorce the week after the sentencing. The family court restored her unsupervised visits with Hazel after she completed a 6-month parenting program and a court-ordered psychological evaluation. She and I have a working co-parenting relationship now. We're cordial. We're never going to be friends. She tried to tell me once that she'd suspected near the end, and I cut her off and told her I didn't want to hear it. Some things you can't take back by saying them. Hazel turned 9 in March. She still sees Dr. Walters, but only once a month now. She's started horseback riding lessons at a stable in McKinney. She has a real elephant friend now, too. A stuffed one I bought her at the Fort Worth Zoo to keep Mr. Pibbles company. She named it Officer Pibbles Company. She named it Officer Pibbles because she's decided Mr. Pibbles needed backup. A bill was introduced in the Texas legislature last session after the local news did a piece on Hazel's case. It would make any adult who knows or reasonably should have known about ongoing physical abuse of a minor in their household criminally liable as an accessory if they fail to report it within 48 hours. They're calling it Hazel's Bill. Cassandra called me crying the day she saw it on the news. She said she'd testify for it if it would help. I told her that was up to her. I sleep most nights now, not every night. Some nights, I'm back in that hallway at the hospital. Some nights I'm back at the door of the container, with my forehead against the metal. Some nights I'm in the pool house, on my knees, with a child in my arms who weighed less than she should have. I see a counselor now too. A VA referral, because the Merchant Marine doesn't have its own. He's a former Army chaplain named Father Estes, who works with veterans on what he calls injury to the conscience. He told me a story once about a sergeant he counseled who'd made a call in Fallujah that saved a squad but killed 2 civilians, and he carried that for the rest of his life. And the carrying of it was its own kind of justice. Father Estes told me what I'd done was wrong by the law and complicated by anything else, and that I had to make my peace with the complication. I think about it almost every day. I think about a man in a container in June in Texas, and I think about a girl in a pool house in April in Texas, and I know which one of those things keeps me up at night. And it isn't the one I did. I don't tell this story to recommend it. I tell it because there are men and women out there right now who are in courtrooms or hospital hallways or living rooms watching the system handle their child's abuser, and they're starting to think the system isn't going to handle it. I'm not telling you to do what I did. I'm telling you that the choice is going to come for you in some form, and you need to know yourself before it does. Document everything. Take photos. Keep records of the bruises and the dates. Believe your kid the first time they tell you something is wrong. Don't wait for a second chance to keep a closer eye. And if you have to break the law to keep your child alive, you better know in advance what you're willing to live with on the other side. Because the other side comes whether you're ready or not. Hazel asked me, about 6 months after, on a long, quiet car ride home from one of her sessions. "Dad, did you do something to Trent?" I looked at her in the rear view. She was looking out the window at the road. "I made sure he understood," I said. "That's all I'm going to tell you, baby. When you're a grown woman, if you still want to know, I'll tell you everything, but not now." She thought about that. Then she said, "Okay, Dad." And then a minute later, looking out at the highway lights, she said, "Thanks for finding me." I had to pull over the shoulder for a minute. I told her I was checking the tire pressure. She knew I was lying. She didn't say anything about it. She just held Mr. Pibbles up to the window so he could see the highway too. That's the part I come back to. Not the container. Not the courtroom. Not the 72 hours of either of us. That moment on the shoulder of US 75. With my daughter being kind enough to pretend I wasn't crying. I'd do it all again. Every minute of it. I'd do worse if I had to. And I'd lose another piece of myself. And that piece would be worth it too. That's the part you have to understand before you ever stand at a door like the one I stood at. The part nobody tells you. You don't get yourself back. You get your child back. And those are not the same trade, but it's the only trade I was ever offered, and I took it, and I'd take it again. And that's all I have to say. I've turned this over in my head more times than I can count, and the thing I keep coming back to is how quietly it all built. Trent didn't become what he was overnight. He was a boy who got locked in a basement by his own stepfather, and nobody intervened, and he grew up believing that's how you handle a child who won't sit still. Cassandra didn't decide one morning to look away. She just kept telling herself a smaller version of the truth, day after day, until the smaller version was the only one she could see. Every choice we make has a tail behind it, and that tail catches up with somebody eventually. In their case, the tail caught my daughter in a hot room with a butter knife in her hand, trying to dig her way out through the drywall. I don't believe in fate, but I believe in cause and effect, and I believe in what we owe each other. I owed Hazel a closer eye, and I didn't give it. Cassandra owed Hazel honesty about her own husband, and she didn't give it. Trent owed his own boyhood self the work of becoming a different kind of man than the one who'd hurt him, and he didn't do it. And so a child paid the bill for 3 grown adults who failed her. That's the part I want anyone listening to understand. Children always pay the bill. They pay it in bruises you can see, and in the quieter ones you can't. What I've tried to give Hazel since, more than anything else, is 3 things. Honesty about what happened. Because pretending only teaches a child that her own memory can't be trusted. The patience to let her heal at her own speed. Because grief and trauma have their own clocks, and they don't wind down to anyone's calendar. And the example of a parent who keeps showing up, sober and on time and unafraid to say the hard thing. I'd like to tell you I had all that figured out before her birthday in March. I didn't. I've been learning it as I go, the way most of us learn the things that matter. If I have any wisdom to pass on, it's this. Strength isn't the thing you discover the day you break a padlock. Strength is the thing you build in the years before, when nobody's watching. By being the kind of person who keeps your word, who tells the truth in small rooms, who shows up for the boring parts. The man who walked into that pool house was only able to do what he did because of 1,000 small choices he'd made years earlier to stay the kind of father his daughter could call out for and trust the answer. Be that kind of person now. Before the door is locked. Before the call comes. Build the man or woman your child is going to need, long before they know they need you. Because by the time they need you, it's already too late to start.